The slap echoed through the living room before anyone understood what had happened. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Glasses froze halfway to lips. The kind of silence that follows something irreversible settled over the house like dust. Harold Whitcomb stood still, his head turned slightly to one side, the sting on his cheek registering a second too late. Across from him stood Evelyn, his stepdaughter, her hands still raised, fingers trembling not with shock, but with fury she had clearly been holding back for some time. The guests had arrived less than an hour earlier. Neighbors, a retired couple from down the street, one of Evelyn's friends from work with her husband. It was supposed to be a polite Sunday gathering. Coffee, pastries, conversation that stayed safely on the surface. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. Harold was 67 years old. He had learned long ago that when a room turns against you, arguing rarely saves you. It only feeds the spectacle. "You don't get to speak to me like that," Evelyn said, her voice sharp, too loud for the space. "Not in my house." Harold looked at her, really looked, and saw something that had been there for years but had never shown itself so plainly. Certainty, the kind that comes from believing the ground beneath your feet cannot shift. "I think you should leave," she continued. Now, no one intervened. No one asked a question. The guests avoided Harold's eyes, suddenly fascinated by their coffee cups, the rug, the window. Silence, when shared, becomes its own verdict. Harold did not raise his voice. He did not touch his cheek. He did not ask what had led to this moment, even though he knew exactly where it had come from. He picked up his coat from the back of the chair. Evelyn's husband, Marcus, stood near the doorway, arms crossed, watching closely. There was no surprise on his face, only calculation. "Take your things," Evelyn said, "and don't come back." Harold nodded once, not in agreement, in acknowledgement. He stepped outside without another word. The door closed behind him, firm and final. The morning air felt colder than it should have. Harold stood on the front step for a moment, listening to the muffled return of conversation inside, as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred. Laughter even, nervous, but real. He walked down the driveway slowly, each step deliberate. Harold Whitcomb had not always been careful. In his younger years, he trusted easily. But after losing his first wife and rebuilding a life from quiet, methodical work, he had learned that stability came from preparation, not optimism. Evelyn had entered his life as an adult. Years earlier when he married her mother, she was already grown, already sharp, already convinced the world owed her something it had not yet delivered. Harold had tried to be patient, respectful, helpful without being intrusive. After her mother passed, that patience turned into obligation. She stayed. Then Marcus moved in. Temporary, they said. Practical, they said. Harold had the space. They had plans. The house changed slowly. Conversations about finances became frequent. Suggestions turned into expectations. Marcus spoke confidently about future arrangements, about how things would be simpler once paperwork was aligned. Harold listened. He always listened. That afternoon, Harold sat on a bench at a nearby park, coat folded beside him. He did not call anyone. He did not panic. He watched families pass, dogs pulling at leashes, children running without concern for tomorrow. He thought about the house, about the deed locked in a safe deposit box under his name alone, about the trust he had set up quietly years earlier, the one Marcus had never asked the right questions about. Harold had planned for his later years the way some people plan for storms, not out of fear, but out of respect for reality. What Evelyn believed she owned and what she actually controlled were two very different things. By evening, Harold checked into a modest hotel across town. He placed his coat carefully on the chair, washed his face, and looked at his reflection in the mirror. The mark on his cheek had faded. The memory had not. He did not feel anger. He felt clarity. Some families fracture loudly. Others reveal themselves in a single moment, when restraint breaks and truth steps forward uninvited. Harold lay down on the bed fully dressed, hands folded over his chest, staring at the ceiling. Inside the house across town, Evelyn was telling her guests a version of the story that made sense to her, that made her feel justified. Marcus listened, nodding, already thinking several steps ahead. Neither of them noticed how quickly certainty can become exposure. Harold closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to think. Because being thrown out of a house is humiliating. Being underestimated is dangerous. And the difference between the two often decides how the story ends. By morning, the story had already started changing. Evelyn woke with the brittle certainty of someone who believed the worst part was over. The house felt quieter without Harold moving through it, without his routines, his careful habits. She told herself the silence was relief. Marcus, however, was restless. He didn't argue, he said over breakfast, staring into his phone. "That's not normal." Evelyn brushed it off. He knew he was in the wrong. Marcus looked up. People who know they're wrong usually try to explain themselves. Evelyn frowned, irritated by the suggestion. "He's old." He froze. That's all. But the words didn't sit as comfortably as she wanted them to. Across town, Harold Whitcomb sat at a small table near the window of the hotel café, stirring his coffee slowly. He had slept little, but his mind was clear. The events of the previous day replayed without distortion. The slap, the silence. Marcus's eyes. Harold had spent most of his working life in procurement and compliance for a regional construction firm. Not glamorous, not powerful in obvious ways. But it had taught him one thing better than almost anything else. Ownership is not about presence. It is about paper, timing, and restraint. After breakfast, Harold made 3 calls. The first was to his attorney, a woman he had retained years earlier when updating his estate. He did not explain the emotions. He explained the facts. The second was to his bank, confirming access restrictions he had already set in motion long ago. The third was to a storage facility, where a small, unremarkable lockbox waited under his name. He did not return to the house. Not yet. By midday, Evelyn's confidence began to crack. A message from the utilities company arrived first, then one from the homeowner's insurance provider. Both were polite, both were brief, both requested confirmation from the legal owner before processing recent changes. She forwarded them to Marcus. He stared at the screen longer than necessary. "That's odd," he said. Evelyn crossed her arms. "What is?" "They're asking for authorization from Harold." "Well, of course they are," she snapped. "He lived here." Marcus shook his head slowly. "No, they're asking because he owns it." Evelyn laughed, sharp and dismissive. "That's impossible." Marcus didn't laugh back. "Did you ever see the deed?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated. "My mother told me." "Did you see it?" he repeated. Silence filled the kitchen. Marcus exhaled through his nose. "That's a problem." Evelyn's voice rose. "You said everything was settled. You said the house would transfer automatically." "I said it would if the paperwork matched what you told me," Marcus replied. "I asked if there was a trust." "You said no." "I said I didn't know," she shot back. "You said it wouldn't matter." Marcus stood and paced. "It matters if he planned." At the hotel, Harold reviewed a folder spread neatly across the desk. Copies of documents, correspondence, notes written in his steady hand. He had anticipated resistance in his later years. What he had not anticipated was how quickly entitlement turns to aggression when challenged. The slap had not shocked him. It had confirmed something. That afternoon, Harold walked into a legal office downtown and signed a series of documents that did not announce themselves loudly, but carried weight that could not be ignored. Notices were prepared, instructions clarified, protections activated. By evening, the phone calls began. Evelyn called first. Harold let it ring. Marcus called next. Harold watched the screen light up, then fade. He finally answered on the third attempt. "You need to come back," Marcus said, skipping pleasantries. "We need to talk." Harold's voice was calm. "I don't. You can't just disappear," Evelyn snapped in the background. "This is our home." Harold paused. "No," he said quietly. "It is not." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Marcus spoke again, slower now. "What are you doing?" Harold looked out the hotel window at the street below, people moving without awareness of the shift happening elsewhere. "I'm correcting a misunderstanding," he replied. The line went silent. That night, Evelyn sat alone in the living room, staring at the walls as if they might explain themselves. Marcus sat across from her, scrolling through legal forums, his earlier confidence unraveling. They had believed power came from proximity. Harold had always known better, and as the distance between them grew, so did the realization that the house they thought they had claimed was never truly theirs to begin with. The house began to reject them, not all at once, not dramatically, in small, unmistakable ways that stripped away the illusion of control Evelyn had clung to since Sunday morning. The gardener didn't show up. The cleaning service canceled without explanation. A notice appeared from the insurance company stating coverage would lapse without confirmation from the legal owner. Marcus stopped pretending it was temporary. He sat at the dining table late into the night, laptop open, legal pads filled with half-formed plans. Every option led back to the same conclusion. Harold had not reacted emotionally. He had acted structurally. That made him impossible to rush. "You said he wouldn't do this," Evelyn snapped, pacing the kitchen. "You said he wouldn't push back." Marcus rubbed his temples. "I said most people don't." "Well, he's doing it." "Yes," Marcus said quietly, "because he prepared." That word struck harder than any insult. Prepared. Evelyn thought back over the years. Harold's habits. The way he filed papers immediately. The way he never discussed money casually. The way he listened more than he spoke. She had mistaken restraint for passivity. She had been wrong. The call from the attorney came the next morning. Marcus put it on speaker. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, unimpressed. The eviction timeline was firm, the ownership uncontested. Any attempt to delay would escalate costs without changing the outcome. When the call ended, the kitchen felt hollow. "What do we do?" Evelyn asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice carried a finality she hadn't heard before. "We stop pretending this is ours." Evelyn's chest tightened. "You're giving up?" "I'm being realistic," he said. "There's a difference." She laughed, sharp and brittle. "You were realistic when you told me to stand my ground, when you told me the house would be mine." Marcus stood. "I was realistic based on what you told me." The silence that followed was colder than shouting. That afternoon, Evelyn tried one last approach. She went alone. Harold answered the door of the modest townhouse he had rented without comment. He did not look surprised to see her, only tired. "I just want to talk," she said. He stepped aside. She stood awkwardly in the living room, suddenly aware of how little space she occupied now. No guests, no audience, no leverage. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that," she said. Harold folded his hands. "It did. You don't understand how it looked," she continued. "Everyone was watching. You embarrassed me." Harold met her gaze. "You embarrassed yourself." Her eyes flashed. "You think you're better than me?" "No," he replied. "I think I'm responsible for myself." She swallowed. "You're really going to take everything?" Harold shook his head slowly. "I'm keeping what was already mine." The distinction seemed to exhaust her. When she left, she did not slam the door. Back at the house, boxes began to appear. Not out of defiance, out of necessity. Marcus arranged movers, quietly, without ceremony. He did not tell Evelyn where they were going. She did not ask. By the end of the week, the living room looked unfamiliar. Walls bare, furniture gone, the echo of footsteps louder than memory. Evelyn sat on the floor one evening, surrounded by half-packed boxes, replaying the moment again and again. The raised hand, the sound, the way she had expected something to follow, an apology, a surrender. Instead, she had triggered a withdrawal. Harold returned to the house the morning they moved out, not to watch, not to gloat. He walked through each room alone after the keys were left on the counter. He opened windows, let the air move again. The house felt lighter. He stood in the living room for a long moment, then turned off the lights and locked the door behind him. Some lessons announce themselves loudly, others take time to sink in. And as Evelyn drove away, looking back only once, she finally understood the cost of mistaking entitlement for ownership. But understanding, Harold knew, rarely arrives in time to change the outcome. The letter arrived 2 days later, not dramatic, not threatening, plain white envelope. Harold Whitcomb's name typed neatly in the corner as sender, not recipient. That detail alone made Evelyn's stomach tighten before she even opened it. Marcus read it first. His face changed as he moved from line to line. Not anger, not disbelief, something quieter, recognition. "It's a notice," he said finally. "He's formally reasserting ownership." Evelyn snatched the pages from his hand. The language was calm, precise, and impossible to argue with. Legal ownership confirmed. Unauthorized occupants identified. A timeline established. "They can't do this," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "They can," Marcus replied. "And he already has." Evelyn paced the living room, hands clenched. "He wouldn't humiliate me like this, not after everything I did for him." Marcus looked up sharply. "You slapped him." She froze. Outside, the neighborhood carried on as if nothing had shifted. Cars passed. Lawns were trimmed. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Inside the house, certainty began to collapse under its own weight. Marcus spent the afternoon making calls. A lawyer friend, a real estate agent, an accountant who asked more questions than he answered. Each conversation ended the same way. Ownership was clear. Protections were active. Nothing could be reversed quickly. By evening, the house no longer felt like a victory. It felt exposed. Across town, Harold sat in the attorney's office, listening carefully as she outlined the next steps. He did not interrupt. He did not rush. "You handled this correctly," she said. "By leaving. By not escalating." Harold nodded. "They wanted control, not conversation." "Exactly," she replied. "Now they'll try pressure, emotion, blame." Harold smiled faintly. "They already did." That night, Evelyn showed up at the hotel. She did not call first. She stood in the lobby, arms crossed tightly, eyes red but determined. When Harold stepped out of the elevator, she turned toward him immediately. "We need to talk," she said. Harold stopped a few feet away. "You embarrassed me," she said, "in front of everyone." Harold's voice remained level. "You struck me." She flinched. "I was angry." "So was I," he said. "I chose differently." Her shoulders sagged slightly. "Marcus said you planned all this." Harold met her eyes. "I planned to protect myself." She laughed once, bitter. "You never trusted us." "I trusted you with access," Harold replied. "Not ownership." For a moment she looked like she might cry. Then her jaw hardened. "You think you've won," she said. Harold shook his head. "No, I think you're learning." She left without another word. Back at the house, Marcus packed quietly. Not to leave, to prepare. Documents stacked, files copied. He moved like someone trying to stay ahead of a wave he could already see cresting. The second letter arrived the next morning. An eviction notice. Lawful, timed, precise. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table for a long time after reading it. She thought about the slap again, the sound it made, how quickly the room had turned. She had believed power came from asserting it loudly. Harold had never raised his voice. By afternoon, word had spread. Neighbors asked questions. Friends stopped calling. The version of events Evelyn had told on Sunday no longer held together under scrutiny. At the hotel, Harold packed his things calmly. He checked out without incident and walked to his car, folder tucked under his arm. He did not feel triumph. He felt resolution. That evening, he drove past the house once. Not stopping, not slowing. Lights were on inside. Movement behind the windows. A life unraveling that he no longer belonged to. Some reckonings arrived through confrontation. Others arrived through paperwork and patience. Harold preferred the kind that lasted. And as the days shortened and options narrowed, Evelyn and Marcus finally began to understand the difference between believing something is yours and proving it. The house did not celebrate its return to silence. It simply accepted it. Harold Whitcomb moved back in on a quiet Monday morning, the kind that felt deliberately ordinary. No neighbors watched, no cars slowed. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind him with the same care he had used for decades. The rooms were empty but intact. No damage, no vandalism, just absence. He walked through each space once, not inspecting, just reacquainting himself. The kitchen where arguments had quietly fermented. The living room where a single raised hand had rewritten everything. The hallway where certainty had once lived, unchallenged. Harold opened the windows and let fresh air move through the house. That afternoon, he met with his attorney one last time. The paperwork was complete. The eviction closed. Ownership reaffirmed. No appeals filed. No loose ends left dangling. They didn't contest it, she said. That usually means they finally understood. Harold nodded. Understanding comes late. He declined to pursue further action. No civil suit. No public reckoning. What had happened was recorded where it mattered. The law had spoken clearly enough. Justice, Harold believed, did not always need to be loud. Evelyn called once. Harold let it ring. She sent a message later that night. Not an apology, not an explanation, just a statement. "I didn't think you would actually do it." Harold read it once, then set the phone down. People often confuse kindness with hesitation. They mistake patience for fear. He had learned, late but thoroughly, that clarity frightens those who rely on confusion. Marcus did not reach out. Harold heard through a neighbor that they had moved into a smaller place across town, that Marcus was scrambling, that Evelyn had withdrawn from most of her social circle, embarrassed by a version of events she could no longer control. Harold did not take satisfaction in it. He took relief. Weeks passed. The house settled back into routine. Morning light across the kitchen floor. Evenings spent reading, restoring the quiet order he had always preferred. He repainted one wall, replaced a broken hinge. Small acts of ownership that felt more meaningful than any confrontation ever could. One afternoon, Harold stood in the living room, the same spot where everything had unraveled, and realized something unexpected. He was not angry anymore. The slap no longer replayed sharply. It had dulled into context. A moment that revealed rather than destroyed. It had shown him exactly who Evelyn was when she believed herself untouchable, and it had shown him who he was when pushed beyond courtesy. Harold Whitcomb was 67 years old. He had lost a marriage, gained a stepchild he never truly knew. Lost that too. What remained was something steadier than affection, and stronger than pride. Self-possession, ownership of his life, his space, his choices. One evening he sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the trees, listening to the familiar sounds of the neighborhood. A car door closing, someone laughing down the street. Life continuing without apology. He thought about how easily everything could have gone differently, how close he had come to apologizing for something he had not done, how tempting it would have been to stay quiet, to endure, to keep the peace at the cost of himself. He was glad he hadn't. Harold stood, went inside and locked the door. Not out of fear, out of finality. Some stories end with reconciliation, others end with distance. This one ended with something simpler and harder earned. A man returning to his own house, on his own term, and for the first time in a long while, nothing in the silence felt unfinished.